As we approach the quarter pole of the NHL season, the Seattle Kraken are one of the surprise teams around the league. Erica Ayala of Locked On Kraken is here to tell us how they've gotten it done and their big improvement for this season. All that and more coming up on this episode of the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Gil Martin, so glad you could join us today, and thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. It is my pleasure right now to welcome back the host of Locked On Kraken, Erica Ayala. And Erica, your team, one of the pleasant surprises of this early 2022-2023 NHL season.
Yeah, for sure. I talked a lot in the offseason about wanting us to see a team that really pushed to be at 500. And I know some of our long-term listeners were like, well, maybe let's start at 500 at home and see where we go from there. But actually, we've met 500 at home, just got there, and overall. So you're absolutely right, Gil. It's been an exciting team to watch. I think that we've made improvements and we're starting to build that consistency, which is what I love.
Yeah, great to see that. And let's start in goal, because the goals against, this is a top 10 team in the league right now. How important has Martin Jones's performance been to this team this season?
He's been critically important. I love having Allison Lucan on our home broadcast because she does a great job talking about the analytics. And it's really not just making the saves, but he's making the saves above expected. So making saves that he wasn't predicted and projected, to make. And you'll hear Dave Haxtell, our head coach, talk a lot also about he makes the right saves at the right time. We know how important momentum can be in hockey. And so not only getting the wins at the right times, but making the saves at the right times has been the calling card for Martin Jones.
Yeah, he seems to be off to a very, very good start. And, you know, the Kraken are mostly a younger team, and yet they seem to be coming up big in a lot of clutch situations.
Yes, indeed. I have loved to see that. I know that I continue to talk about defensively, our overall defensive unit. I still think we can improve upon that. Maybe we'll do that next offseason. But where we lack maybe a really strong, solid, elite level defender, especially considering what defense looks like in the NHL these days, we have made up in a team focus on winning the puck, on being tough to play against. And that comes from players like Yanni Gourde, undrafted player. Yanni Gourde has 2 Stanley Cup titles to his name, but is really making a mark on the Seattle Kraken team. Brandon Tanev coming back from injury. When we had that 5-game win streak, those were 2 players that if you see their numbers, they're actually on pace to have career numbers, especially within that span, because of the grit and grind style of hockey that they play. We've also seen Matty Beniers early on be that type of player, be that it guy. We've talked about that before, Gil. I do think he's found it a little bit more difficult to find his scoring touch, but that's to be expected. Now he is someone that other teams will scout and circle, and so that has changed how he now impacts the game. So now he's winning puck battles along the boards and really helping facilitate a little bit more, which is what you want to see in a centerman. And I'm not worried. I think the scoring touch will come back. So those are just a handful of some of the guys that are younger, but still with some experience. Of course, Matty Beniers being one of the youngest in that group.
No question about that. How about Jordan Eberle? I've got to ask, being that we got him from my New York Islanders, but he seems to be coming up with some clutch goals and also some leadership for this young team.
Well, I'll start with the last piece. It has never escaped me how important Jordan Eberle, I'd add Jaden Schwartz into that mix as well, but Eberle has been one of the consistent voices to keep it kind of real. Dave Haxel keeps things pretty close to the chest. I think he and his team know exactly what he expects, but he keeps it pretty mild when he speaks to media. We can get some of what the struggles have been throughout the years from a player like Eberle, where the team wants to push certain buttons. So I personally love that kind of leadership. He doesn't have to be mean about it or, throwing water bottles at people while they're doing interviews, but he can be real at the same time. And that's the kind of leadership that I love. But speaking of Eberle on the ice, man, things have just opened up for him. And I think that's as we see some other caliber forwards come in, his role has changed so that he can be an elite scorer. And that came up in a big way for us, certainly throughout the season. But I want to talk about that overtime win against the Los Angeles Kings that we just had at Climate Pledge Arena. We really need to get points in the division. We needed to win that game, and it was Eberle that got it done.
Big game right there, and a very satisfying win for the Kraken. How about Jared McCann leading the team right now with 7 goals in only 15 games? What has he added to the mix?
Jared McCann was the first player that we signed to an extended contract, and you're seeing why. That Dave Haxtell and, of course, Ron Francis and company really wanted to have him on this team. We spoke about Eberle Saturday. Jared McCann scored his 100th career point in the Seattle Kraken's 100th game as a franchise. That was amazing. Jared McCann has been a consistent force for us here. We know that he can score. He spent a little bit of time out of the lineup, and so we saw things shake up, and now things have shaken up again, including we have actually Bjorkstrand, who dropped down a line or two because we want to have McCann engaged. Can't speak enough about Jared McCann.
Yeah, he is looking very, very good. So I guess a question that a lot of hockey fans who maybe don't follow the Kraken as closely are asking right now, is this sustainable? What does it take for this team to be in the playoff hunt and maybe even make the playoffs this year in their second year of existence?
That's the big question, Gil. Are we going to continue to get this performance from Martin Jones? And the good news is that I don't know that we need to answer that question, because we found out over the weekend that Philipp Grubauer is back. Philipp Grubauer, it's very small sample size, but his numbers are still lagging behind a little bit what we are seeing from Martin Jones. That being said, and we were talking about this, off air in the green room, if you will, the Seattle Kraken struggled. So what we saw as success, maybe, and take it with a grain of salt, in the preseason, we did not have that consistency. And that's really regardless of opponent or roster. There were things that the Seattle Kraken were doing in the preseason that they didn't do to start the season, which was extremely frustrating. And the frustration wasn't coming from the wins and losses, at least for me when I was on Locked On Kraken. It was coming from the lack of consistency. We also went on that 5-game win streak, and then we lost 3 in a row. Even then, I was less frustrated because the consistency was there and building. So to answer your question, I do think we're, about 20 games in now. I do think that the consistency is leaps and bounds better than it was last year. And it's also gotten better since the start of the season. You're not going to win them all, but if we can grind out these wins, like against the LA Kings, like some of the other overtime wins that we had, we were losing those games last year. Right. We were losing those those 1-goal games last year, and we're starting to win them. Now, granted, in overtime, I want to be greedy and get all of the points, but that is an improvement. And with Philipp Grubauer, I think he never felt comfortable. We've talked about this before. I think that now that he can come in, he's been able to see this team perform. Maybe some of the things that were lacking as far as chemistry or just him feeling comfortable in front of this team, maybe now with a bird's eye view, since he was on the injured reserve, maybe that will help him settle in when we do see him, which I do think might be for the first time since coming off of the injured reserve as we play San Jose later this week.
Yeah, should be interesting to watch, and we'll keep an eye on that. Erica, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, first, Gil, I would be remiss if I didn't start with thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to chat hockey with you. I love, when you're like, hey, let's talk Kraken hockey for a Monday show. I always love doing that. But you can find Locked On Kraken at Locked On Kraken on all social media platforms. And of course, right on YouTube for those watching on YouTube. And you can find me personally at elindsay08. That's LINDSAY08 on all social media platforms.
Erica, it is always a pleasure talking hockey with you. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Gil. Enjoy the holiday for you and all of the listeners.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, we've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you'll find those at BetOnline as well. We are always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Hey, maybe you could take your expertise on the NHL and put it to good use. Place some bets, check out the odds at betonline.net. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.